Hi, welcome to BA Brew. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Simon.
And I'm Mike.
Yay, we did it, guys. Right. Today we're going to talk about neurodiversity. We're really excited to talk about this subject. And if I'm honest, a little bit apprehensive and nervous as well. It's quite a challenging subject that I'm hopeful that we can shed some light on. Simon, could you tell us what motivated you to contact us to suggest this as a subject for the brew?
Yeah. So there's a couple of reasons really. First and foremost, it's a topic I care about and I'm very passionate about for two main reasons. For a bit of context background, I have two young children. I have a soon to be 11-year-old boy, and I have a 5.5-year-old daughter. And my son is neurotypical, and my daughter is autistic, which is a neurodiverse condition. So that is not something I could have said out loud 2 or 3 years ago, but it's been a learning curve. We're in a good place now. So it's something I'm very passionate about. And the reason I can talk to it with a degree of confidence is almost to kind of pay it forward. There were people that went before me that have sort of told their stories and shared their experiences that have helped me, whether they realize it or not, kind of help me understand what autism is, what it isn't, and sort of set me on that sort of path really. So I guess from a position of strength I maybe didn't have 2 or 3 years ago, I want to be a part of that conversation to keep the conversation going. And then what I found is, I'm sure we can unpack this if we want to, is what I found is during my daughter's sort of journey to that autism diagnosis, you meet with lots of professionals, lots of clinicians, etc., and you talk about family histories. And it didn't come as a surprise that during that process, I was told that I had pretty much all bar one of the diagnostic indicators for ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So yes, a kind of long way of saying it's a topic I'm very passionate about, care very much about, and I want to be a part of that conversation now to help shine a light on it.
So as I say, I think it's incredibly brave of you to suggest it as a subject and to be here now talking about it. And while you're talking about other professionals paying it forward and other people paying it forward, hopefully today can help you pay it forward for others that maybe are sat there listening, that people that are interested in neurodiversity and things like autism spectrum disorder and ADHD and others. It's an interesting one. Could we try and just for the listener, the viewer, what is neurodiversity? Are we able to kind of get a view of what is neurodiversity? What do we mean if we use that word?
Yes, it's a really good question in terms of kind of framing what it is and isn't. It's almost one of those, if we went to Google what is neurodiversity, we'll get thousands, possibly tens of thousands of results and different variations on it, which is fine. The one that I've kind of come to be comfortable using is essentially neurodiversity is an umbrella, a broad term for kind of describing the sort of diversity of the human brain. Mm-hmm. So the almost sort of infinite variations in that sort of neurocognitive function that we have as a species. Yeah. And neurotypical is a way of saying this is where the sort of, I guess, the vast percentage of the population will be in terms of how that sort of neurocognitive function operates. Neurodiversity is that sort of, for better lack of a word, that deviation from that neurotypical mindset. And how that might present are in some very sort of specific neurodiverse conditions. So the most common ones, and by no means exhaustive, but the most common ones are autism. So autism is a lifelong development disability. ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You have dyslexia, which relates to the skills required for writing and spelling, and can also impact how the brain processes information. You have things like dyspraxia, which relate to movement and balance and eye-to-hand coordination. And then the one that I always do a terrible job of pronouncing, so I apologize in advance, but dyscalculia, which relates to numbers. So being able to understand, interpret the application of numbers, which then impairs sort of mathematical, has mathematical connotations, etc. So yeah, neurodiversity is that kind of broad umbrella term for that real diversity in the human brain, and you have these very specific sort of neurodiverse conditions such as autism, ADHD, etc., etc.
And I think brilliant that you've been able to share that with us. And one of the things that goes on in my mind when I talk about this subject is the language. I'm very wary of using the wrong terms and trying to, I guess, not offend. And one of the things I'm quite aware of at the moment is that the terms that we might use today on today's pod might change in terms of the acceptance of those terms. So the term neurotypical, for example, which we're using, is okay today, but in 3 years' time, 3 years after this recording, that word might not be acceptable, for example, or there might be a different set of language. And I think this is a real problem, because what it means is that we don't talk about neurodiversity because we're afraid to talk about it, even though we might be interested in it and we might want to help each other and our colleagues. I think there's a real barrier. Mike, have you experienced this, where there's you want to talk about it, but you're not quite sure what words to use and to say?
Yeah, and definitely it is challenging because as Simon was saying, it's a spectrum disorder. There's a mixture of things. It's not like another condition like we say chickenpox. You can recognize somebody has got chickenpox because they've got characteristic spots on their body. Neurodiversity, and I don't want to equate that to chickenpox, but it's really difficult to diagnose. So if you look at some of the diagnostic tools they have, there's quite a lot of things that you have to go through. So it's not a straightforward thing to diagnose, and there's a very poor understanding, I think, around some of those conditions. I've had experience and proximity to dyslexia and ADHD, and I kind of have a feeling I've got some of the. I don't know whether I would be diagnosed as having ADHD, but I've certainly tick a number of the boxes on the attention deficit side of that equation. But yeah, certainly the language. It's things trying to talk about it without labeling the person. So having the label for the condition, I think, can be helpful because it can help people understand what they are and what they're experiencing. But that label itself. So if I think some people would describe somebody as being dyslexic, and they're not being dyslexic. It's not a label of them. It's a condition. So they have dyslexia or they have autism. So it's a characteristic. It's one of a number of things they have, rather than that full label. So that's kind of my thoughts around that.
So it's rather than saying, say, Alex is dyslexic, is the language that's more appropriate to say, well, Alex has dyslexia, or and is the intent that it's the individual? So it's always Alex, if that's our persona that we're considering. They're a full functioning human being with many different wants, needs, desires, hopes, fears, and loads of interesting characteristics, and they've got this one other characteristic that's dyslexia. Is that acceptable, Simon, or have I got that wrong? Am I misinterpreting kind of why?
No, it's really interesting because it's brought to mind the similar challenges I had. So when I thought about how I describe my daughter, do I say she is autistic or she has autism? And so it's and I think that's the value of these conversations. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong, in my opinion. I think sometimes it is my daughter is my daughter. Her name is Maya. Maya is Maya.
Yeah.
She's not. She's not defined by her autism, by that label, as Mike said. She is her own unique, wonderful human being that has certain learning difficulties, etc. So. It is difficult. There is no right and wrong, but I think that's the value in sort of these conversations, right?
Nicole, this is a subject, and I don't know, but have you found yourself stopping yourself talking about it because you're worried about saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we don't want to, as Mike said, label it. We don't want to use language that's offensive and non-inclusive, that is disrespectful or judgmental. And I think we're also really mindful of assuming we know what's best for the person, rather than, because everyone's different and everyone needs different, you know, ways in which we can help them. So I think it's always really hard for Assist, when we're delivering courses or apprenticeships and things like that, thinking that we know best, rather than opening up the conversation and saying, how can we support you? And I think that can then be our barrier to sort of just think, oh, if we just ignore it, or if we just try and not approach it, then it will just sort of sort itself out, or it will go away.
I really like what you just said there, Nicole. That one of the problems with labels is, once you see that label, you think you know how to deal with that label, and actually this is a spectrum condition, and it's the best way to find out how to help that person is to ask that person, not assume that they're the same as everybody else who's neurodiverse. But there's no such thing as a typical neurodiverse person.
I think another problem we have is encouraging people in feeling that they can share with us. So we've had a few people, especially on the apprenticeship program, who haven't felt confident enough to share with us that they, are dyslexic or have dyslexia or need further support. So, Simon, do you have any sort of suggestions on how we can perhaps start the conversation, or encourage people to feel that, it's not something that they should be afraid to share, Sorry.
Yeah, so I think the one key word that comes to mind is trust. It's about the individual. And again, so if I talk from my own experience, it's about being in a position where I feel comfortable enough to share that. So it's more about the environment around the individual, because it needs to be on the individual's terms. Like I said, I probably knew that I had ADHD looking back, I've had it since childhood. Well, it's lifelong, but that would have manifested itself as a child. But as an adult, I became aware of it. It's always been there. But bearing in mind, I've probably carried that with me for 20 plus years. It's really only in the last couple of years that I've even let people into that ever so slightly. And that's because I've become a bit more understanding of it in terms of myself. And then I've been in environments where I felt like, okay, I'm comfortable now talking about this. Because in the past, I would have been terrified about talking about ADHD. I'd have worried about my job, and is somebody going to look at this as a negative, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that element of creating a safe environment, but also it's about the individual. It has to be the individual that wants to feel like they want to talk openly about it. So for me, yeah, it's having a safe environment for that individual to feel like they can talk about it and share it, and let people into their world.
It's interesting because I'm just, as you're talking there, thinking about psychological safety in the workplace. And for me, that's a benefit for everyone. Inclusivity of all of our differences as human beings. We're all unique, and we should be able to bring our whole self to work and not hide a particular aspect of our characteristics, our personality, our who we are, I suppose. But unfortunately, there's lots of workplaces where there is a lack of trust and a lack of psychological safety. And if that's the case, then and you are, sat there thinking, well, I might be somewhere in this neurodiverse spectrum. I'm fearful that I'm, for example, exhibiting, behaviors that might be aligned with ADHD, for example, and you're in a workplace where you're not feeling safe. That's just, I can imagine, just exceptionally stressful and not very pleasant at all for that person. And it might be you don't want to tell your colleagues that you're dyslexic, or that you've got a different characteristic. It's really tough for individuals. Have you experienced that at all, Simon?
Yeah, I have. look, I'm on a podcast now talking openly about having ADHD, and like I said, there are elements of that I believe are a strength. There, like you said, we're all unique anyway, but there are elements of the ADHD that, especially things like hyperactivity, especially things like impulsivity, that I now embrace. They are a strength, and they're a characteristic of me as an individual, and so on and so forth. But yeah, there have definitely been times early in my career where I wouldn't have been comfortable sharing that, because my mindset would have been, people are going to focus on the negatives. Like, I do have difficulty concentrating and focusing on certain tasks if I'm not sufficiently motivated. That doesn't mean I can't do them. If I get a 40-page Word document to peer review, I don't have a hope of doing that at my desk. My attention is going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
I have mechanisms to deal with that. I will print it off. I will go sit outside. I will break it into piecemeal. I can still do the task. My approach is just different. And in the past, I might have felt like the need to mask that, so hide that from people if there wasn't that safe environment. But I think it is, where people feel comfortable. Sharing an insight into that neurodiversity can be quite powerful. And just to give one real quick example, a colleague at work is dyslexic, and he's been running some wonderful internal workshops talking about what dyslexia is. And I thought I had a baseline understanding of dyslexia before I went into that workshop, but to actually hear it from somebody with dyslexia, the different types of dyslexia, the challenges that it creates, but then also solutions to overcome it, is incredibly insightful. It just gave me a much richer understanding of what, in this example, dyslexia is and what it isn't. So yeah.
That 40-page document that you've got to peer review, I think going outside and breaking it into chunks and giving yourself a reward when you get to the end of page one, I don't know, be it a Lindt chocolate or a Smartie or whatever is your, the gamifying the arduous experience of going through the 40 pages might be useful for all of us. And it's not those sorts of things, just making the workplace a little bit more fun and interesting and engaging might be useful for everyone. Mike, how do you get through the 40-page documents?
When Simon was saying that, I thought, yeah, that sounds like me. I can't read 40 pages of something on a screen and then put the notes on the screen. I have to print it off as well and go in the garden, where you think there'd be more distractions. But I don't know, there's something about this environment with emails popping up and messages coming up on Teams that I have to go and look at them. If it's something that's flashed, I've got to think, what was that's flashed up on my screen, and need to do it. And actually, just, I don't know, the printed word is just a little bit easier, and it's not good for the planet. And I've tried to use my iPad instead, so I'm just looking at PDFs on there, but it's still not quite the same. But yeah, I mean, that rang some bells for me. And again, I'm thinking, well, maybe I should go for that diagnosis and get my label. But as you say, there are often we can focus on the negatives, but there are positives. There are definitely positives to things. And finding those positives and embracing those positives, I think, is a good thing. I've heard the term, you often hear the term disability, and I've heard the term used a few times in different circumstances, but we should think of different ability rather than disability, because actually some of these conditions give you extra abilities, almost superpowers that the neurotypical person hasn't got. So that sometimes your focus, sometimes dyslexic people have got much better spatial awareness. So and you see you can see that in certain people, certain neurodiverse conditions are overrepresented in certain professions, and I think that's kind of quite interesting. And think, well, actually, we should be embracing that diversity, because actually, there's lots of things we can gain if we just talk to the same people, just talk to people like us. We just learn about our things. We don't expand our horizons. And as a BA, that's something I really embrace, the idea of talking to lots of people to get different ideas, different perspectives.
It's a great source of creativity, isn't it?
Yeah.
To people like yourself all the time, you're going to get the same ideas and the same ways of thinking. I once worked for a CIO that was, they're very senior, very powerful person in the organisation, and they were extremely open about being dyslexic. And it was quite inspiring in a way, because this was a good kind of 6-7 years ago, and by that very senior leader being open about their dyslexia, and talking about it, their experience with it, I found it quite inspiring. And I think that the workplace, or some workplaces, are changing, and these kinds of discussions are coming to the fore more often. And it sounds like a great piece of work that your colleagues done, to share their experience in this, in dyslexia as well, Simon. Just thinking about that document and the power of visuals as well, using models, pictures to communicate, I think can be of massive value for anyone as well. And just break it. Who wants to read the 40-page document on requirements or whatever it is? It's kind of, if we can have some visuals in there, can help make the content more accessible, potentially, for everyone. Nicole, I quite like some of the pictures that you draw to explain things. I think you're quite good at this.
Yeah, and before this session, Simon sent an email with an image around explaining the autism spectrum and how it's not linear, and how I think it's like radial, you can have different or segments of the pie, as it were. And straight away, that I learned so much more from that one diagram than reading all of these articles on various websites and the NHS and all these papers and things. It just made sense. So I really love it when people can kind of break it down, make it simple, nice and visual, and you can take a lot more away from that sometimes.
Yeah. Simon, how are you finding working in the virtual world? Is it caused extra challenges or not?
Yeah. If I'm honest, it has, and it might be worth, if you're okay, if I just sort of unpack a little bit what ADHD is and what it means to me. So ADHD is, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and there are kind of three components to that. You've got inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Inattention specifically in a virtual world is I found has been the biggest challenge. So the best way I've had it described to me is your brain's got three kind of key systems when it comes to attention. You've got that sort of really narrow focus. So if you imagine you've got a torch beam, and you get out a book, that's your narrow focus, that's your torch beam looking at the book. You've then got this kind of alerting system, which is almost like your floodlights. So that's always on. That's always a good example is if you're driving down the road, your narrow focus is looking at the cars in front of you, but your alerting system, your floodlight, is telling you there's, police lights in the rearview mirror. And then you've got this sort of executive function that oversees those two, and that acts as your filter, as your moderator. And when you've got ADHD, it's not so much a deficit of attention. I think that's a red herring. It's a misnomer. It's more the ability to moderate and regulate your attention. So if I use that example of the Word document, my narrow focus is going to be all over the place. It doesn't want to look at that Word document. It wants to look at emails or Teams. It wants me to go make a cup of tea, etc. So in the office, certainly pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, I found, the ADHD didn't actually hinder me really, because I just didn't. I'm not quite sure why, but I didn't find it. But yeah, in a virtual environment, there's this internal restlessness as well. When we talk about hyperactivity, I think people naturally see that as an external presentation, someone being very talkative, very bouncy, jumping around, which is true. It can manifest in that way, or present in that way, like it does for my daughter. But for me, it's an internal restlessness. So I constantly want to be on the go. I've got this constant need for stimulus. So if you imagine you're sat at a desk and you've got a task to do, in the office, you've got distractions, but at home, you've got those extractions times 5 or 10. And it's a constant battle to try and suppress those. To go put the washing on, to go answer the door, to go make a cup of tea, to go send a Teams message, to look at a phone, it's hard. It is very hard. It can be exhausting. And Sometimes I find even the most trivial task can be the most exhausting, like anything administrative, simple things like filling out a timesheet. They're exhausting for me, yeah.
Timesheets or expenses, those kind of things that
Yes.
I have to do, but aren't a great deal of fun.
Yeah.
Not pleasant. So you was talking about how prior to us hitting the record button, how to help you have focus on a video conference call, you might look away
Yeah.
from the camera, and you explained how that's actually you concentrating more, but it looks to someone else as though you're not paying attention, and it's kind of just that little body language and that interpretation of the body language. Someone's getting it wrong because they're making an assumption that you're not paying attention. And it's, all of us might do that at times, but it particularly, being able to talk about this potentially with the people that you're on the video conference call with, they can then get insight as to why you're looking away. But it might be that you've actually got, I don't know, I might have a different screen over there with my favorite, I don't know, sporting event on or something, and I'm not paying attention. So it's always trying to be inquiring to find out, I suppose, what's going on. Right. Let's see if we can just think through any final thoughts. Nicole, any final thoughts or questions that you wanted to talk about with regard to this subject of neurodiversity?
Well, I just wanted to ask if there was any top tips on how we could sort of, I guess, as managers or as fellow colleagues, help other colleagues sort of with their roles day to day if it comes to breaking down work or tasks into bite-sized chunks, incentives, putting chocolate bars in every other page of a written report. If there's anything that you personally, Simon, find kind of useful or something someone's done for you and you think, actually, that's really made my life a little bit easier, or...
Yeah. So it will definitely be driven by the individual. So that would be my biggest emphasis. It'll be driven by the individual and what their needs are. So for me, for example, because if I am set a long-term task, that doesn't work very well for me. I'm very much in the moment, the immediacy of something. So I'm looking for those that constant stimulus and that short-term rewards. Even if it builds up to a long-term goal, it's those short-term rewards really. So that would be, so for example, if I think about me as an individual, that would be the sort of support I would want is, yes, there is a bigger goal, but can you give me some short, sharp, snappy stuff that I can get my teeth into? But actually, that may be completely different for somebody else. I may like visuals and I consume information, auditory and so on and so forth. But for somebody else, they might like that 40-page Word document because it gives them the level of detail that they want. So it is, we talk about things like autism as a spectrum condition, et cetera, and I think whether you're neurodiverse or not, a lot of it comes down to preferences. What are the individual's preferences, and providing the support that they may want to help, help support those preferences, really, if that makes sense.
Brilliant question, Nicole. Mike, any final thoughts or questions or things that you wanted to share on this pod?
Yeah, one of the things that occurred to me, I smiled a few times as we've gone through, because some of the things you've said, Simon, they just chime with me. I think, oh yeah, I do that, and yeah, I do that, and so I'm thinking now I perhaps need to go for a bit more of a diagnosis. But we have ourselves as our benchmark, and we tend to think we judge ourselves as normal, and I don't mean to use that in any kind of dismissive way, but we don't know where we sit, because we judge ourselves and the environment we're in. But we might think that maybe we are a bit neurodiverse, and actually maybe asking some questions and exploring and finding out from other people, we realize actually we've all got some characteristics there. And by sharing and talking like that, we might be able to find things that can help us. So I think go and talk to people, find out more about neurodiversity, because you may have a condition yourself. It might help explain some of the things that you struggle with. I struggle with a number of the things, the admin tasks, the task where it seems like it's got a long way off before I need to do it, and it's like, okay, trying to get to that deadline, because it's not really a deadline at the moment because it's too far off. Yeah, so I think I've learned quite a few things just from this chat today, Simon, and I really thank you for your contributions and your honesty and frankness and sharing. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. And then Simon, over to you. Any kind of final things that you wanted to cover on this pod that we haven't talked about just yet? We're coming towards the end.
No, not especially. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. Like I say, it's something that I'm very passionate about. I guess to echo Mike's point there as well is for me, it's about being curious. Respectfully curious, because some individuals, again, some people may be on different journeys and different part of those journeys. So it's been respectful of it, but where the opportunity presents itself, be curious. As I started to open up a little bit more around my experiences of autism and ADHD. I'm happy to talk to colleagues. If people are curious, I'm happy to talk about it, and so on. So yeah, if the opportunity presents itself, then be curious and go and learn more. And like I said at the start, if it helps keep the conversation going and pay it forward, then fantastic.
Brilliant. I've got I'm not sure if I should really share it or not, but I'm going to share. So throughout this pod, I've had a pen in my hand and I've been fiddling with the pen. And I'm not quite sure why. Is it because this is an important subject and I want us to get this pod right? Is it because I'm nervous or excited? I don't know. But little things like fidget toys, making it acceptable and available to everyone, it could make the difference for someone that they can actually have a fidget toy or a stress ball or something, because it helps them to think. And I don't know, Simon, have you seen that overused or misused? I don't know, because everyone does it. So
I do it all the time. So whenever I do sort of in-person public speaking, I'll typically have a marker pen or something in my hand that I'm twiddling with.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the sort of racket. I think in my head it helps just keep. This is just my sort of personal interpretation. Is there's a part of my brain sometimes that needs to be distracted. I liken it to the excitable dog that always wants to go for a walk, that wants to stick his head out the window. There's that part of my brain that sometimes I just need to distract it to focus on tasks, and whether it's twiddling a marker pen, holding something, that for me helps occupy that brain. So yeah, I mean, but again, I wouldn't bat an eyelid if someone in the workplace wanted to do that, because I wouldn't even question it personally. I would just be like, yeah, fine. Just embrace it.
We could make these toys more available for people. Invest in them. You can go and get them. Could be quite useful. Then, and I can't believe as well, we've got all the way through this pod without talking about running as well. Simon, as part of your kind of the things that you obviously do, you're really into running. I'm injured at the moment. I'm just about to go back to running, and Mike's the biggest running fanatic that I know as well. So I can't believe we've got all the way to the end of the pod. Nicole, I'm not sure. Do you enjoy going running?
Not a runner, I'm afraid. No.
Not a runner, no. But we talk about the kind of superpowers, Simon.
Yeah.
You can go and do runs that I couldn't even consider, and I wonder if that's partly because of the way that the brain works. I don't know. So
yes. So I'm for me, that's the hyperactivity part of ADHD, but that is an external manifestation of internal restlessness, if that makes sense. So and the impulsivity. So it's not just running, and by no means am I an athlete. I want to make that clear. I know people can only see my head, but I am by no means. I'm a middle-aged adult, and it's more mental than it is physical. But it's a combination of that internal restlessness and that impulsivity, and I am proud of it. I've accomplished, I think, some incredible things. I'm not particularly fast, but just to close, if I don't mind, because you've opened this can now, Jonathan. I'm proud of it. But
we're just getting into the second half an hour of the pod now, talking about running.
just very quickly is that the impulsivity. So there was a couple of hours, I think it's the 1st or 2nd of January, when I said, what do I want to accomplish this year on a personal level, not professional. And within an hour or two, I had committed on very specific days. I'd signed up to 100,000 steps in 24 hours, a virtual marathon, a 15-kilometer swim, a 50K ultra, a 100-mile bike ride. I have no idea, and I have no desire to create any kind of training plan. I just know that I'm going to do those. Impulsivity meant I put those dates in the diary, and I will work it out along the way, and I'll have lots of fun, and that. But yeah, that's an external manifestation of internal restlessness and impulsivity. Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, Mike, is there going to be a one-upmanship in terms of
Definitely not. You're definitely an athlete, Simon. If you've got all of these plans, I can't compete with that. So
wow, and I'm just in awe because I'm struggling to do a park run at the moment. It's a 5K, so right. Thank you. I just want to say a massive thank you, Simon, for suggesting this subject and for coming on. I think it's been exceptionally informative for me, and I hope it's been useful for the listeners, the watchers. Nicole, thank you for sharing your insights. Mike, thank you for being here. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you found this useful. If you have found it useful, please do like, share the podcast. If any of you have ideas for future podcasts, please do get in contact with us. Our email address is babrew@AssistKD.com. Thank you.